This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards in this video in their store by using the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance and Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to look at monkeys and apes. Obviously, these two creature types aren't entirely identical, just like they aren't in the real world. While they are closely related primates, apes don't have tails, and generally speaking, apes are also larger than monkeys and spend less time in trees. I thought it was worth looking at them together though, since so far Wizards of the Coast has grouped them together, as evidenced by Kibo Ukabi Prince, a legendary creature from Jumpstart that is a good commander for decks built around both types. Doing monkeys and apes together also results in a surprisingly powerful list, and that always makes things more fun. The top 6 on this list have more than 50 points, and the top 3 all have over 100. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the monkey or ape creature type, or be able to make a monkey or ape creature token. In all, there were 84 cards eligible for this list, and in it we'll take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. Alright, let's take a look at Magic's top 10 apes and monkeys. At number 10, it's Kogla and Yoda, one of the team-up legendary creatures from March of the Machine that comes with a very strange type line, in this case, Ape, Dinosaur, Turtle. For 2 generic, 2 red, and 2 green, Kogla and Yoda is a 7/7, and when it enters the battlefield you can choose from 2 options. You can give it trample and haste until end of turn, or you can have it fight a creature you don't control. If you can really pressure your opponent by smashing in right away, you'll do that, and if there's a creature you really need to remove, you'll do that. Either way, you end up with a great deal, but the modality doesn't end there. You can also pay 2 generic, a red, and a green, and discard Kogla and Yoda from your hand to destroy an artifact or enchantment, shuffle Kogla and Yoda into your library, and draw a card. In other words, if your opponent has an artifact or enchantment, Kogla and Yoda gives you a nice 2-for-1. Basically, there's no bad options here, especially because you get such a huge creature. It's been played in standard 5-color control decks, but it's found more success in Modern, where it's a sideboard card in Amulet Titan. You can ramp into Kogla and Yoda in the early game, while still being able to put a Naturalize effect into your deck. Kogla and Yoda doesn't have any points so far in 2024, but it's hard to count it out entirely since it's still in Standard. At number 9, it's Kogla the Titan Ape. That's right, we've got back-to-back Koglas, but this time he's on his own. For 3 generic and 3 green, he's a 7/6 that fights a creature you don't control when he enters the battlefield. He destroys an artifact or enchantment when he attacks, and you can pay 1 generic and a green and return a human to your hand to make Kogla indestructible until end of turn. So like Kogla and Yoda, he's a huge creature that can remove opposing creatures and naturalize opposing permanents, and if you have mana up and a human around, he can be really hard to kill. He get all of his points in Standard and Pioneer in 2021. In the former, he was featured in Mono Green Aggro, and in the latter, in Devotion to Green, a deck that can ramp into him early using Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. He hasn't gained points in a few years, so it's pretty likely some future apes or monkeys will push him off of this list. At number 8, it's Curd Ape. This is Magic's original ape, or monkey, printed originally in Arabian Nights, Magic's very first expansion. For 1 red mana, it's a 1/1, but he gets +1/+2 if you control a forest. In other words, if you play your Curd Ape on turn 1 with a dual land, you've got yourself a 1 mana 2/3. Curd Ape has points from Magic's very first Worlds, which came in 1994, where it was featured in zoo decks, so called because the deck ran several creatures in addition to the ape that you might be able to find at your local zoo. Curd Ape received a reprint in 2006 and enjoyed some more success in Standard as a result, showing up in a new era of zoo decks. Curd Ape has seen play in other formats too, especially in Extended, where it actually got banned in 1997 because it was too good. By the time it was reprinted, it did get another run through Extended, and while it wasn't banned this time, it was still good enough to see heavy play, and it showed up in some more Zoo aggro decks. It's also had a bit of success in Modern Zoo. These days though, Curd Ape has been outclassed by other 1-drops that don't demand a forest to be super efficient. At number 7, it's Ukabi Rutan. For 2 generic and a green, this is a 2/2 ape that destroys an artifact when it enters the battlefield. This is a fairly run-of-the-mill looking card for us today, but Ukabi Rutan was part of a cycle of creatures in Visions that introduced Enter the Battlefield abilities, so it actually represents a very important moment in Magic design. Anyway, playing a Grey Ogre that destroys an artifact is a nice rate, and that was especially true back in the 90s. When it was in Standard, there were enough good artifacts in the format, like Cursed Scroll, which is one of the most heavily played cards in the format, that the Orangutan actually saw main deck play. Perhaps the most notable Standard deck it was part of was Recurring Survival. This was Magic's first true toolbox deck. It could use Survival of the Fittest to grab the Orangutan anytime there was an artifact on the board, allowing you to get maximum value out of it. It was more of a sideboard card in Extended, where it also saw significant play, but it hasn't seen any play anywhere since 2005. At number 6, it's Hooting Mandrels. For 5 generic and a green, it's a 4/4 with Trample, and it comes with Delve, which means you can exile cards from your graveyard to pay for the colorless part of the casting cost. If you've got a well-stocked graveyard, that means the Mandrels can be a 1-mana 4/4 with Trample. It didn't see much play in Standard, as rapidly reducing the cost there wasn't particularly easy, but it has gained points in all of the non-rotating formats. It used to be played in modern decks with graveyard themes like Death's Shadow and Hollow One, but hasn't seen play in the format since one of the main enablers for those decks, Faithless Looting, got banned. It's been played in a variety of legacy graveyard decks over the years, and has recently gotten a pretty big bump because of Up the Beanstalk, which lets you draw a card when you cast the Mandrel, even if you're only paying 1 mana. Right now, it's also played in Neoform decks in Pioneer. Like Up the Beanstalk, Neoform lets you take advantage of the Mandrel's high mana value without actually having to pay a lot of mana for it. If you sacrifice the Mandrels to Neoform, you can grab Atraxa, at which point the game is pretty much over. Hooting Mandrels is going to keep gaining points in Legacy and Pioneer going forward, and it's very likely to move higher on this list in the future. At number 5, it's Gorilla Shaman. For 1 red mana, this ape is a 1/1, and you can pay XX and 1 generic to destroy a non-creature artifact with mana value X. Often called Mox Monkey, despite being an ape, Gorilla Shaman is especially adept at destroying artifacts with a mana value of 0, like the Moxen. He saw some play in both block and extended, but Vintage is where he's done the most work over the years, which makes sense. It's a format loaded up with powerful and cheap artifacts, including the Moxen. He's also pretty heavily played in Pauper. While that format, of course, has no Moxen at all, he still has plenty of cheap targets. The Shaman's going to keep gaining points in the future. At number 4, it's KiZev Skyship Raider. For 1 generic and a red, she's a 1/3 with First Strike and Menace, and she has an attack trigger that qualifies her for this list. When she attacks, she makes a 2/1 legendary monkey token named Ragavan. He enters the battlefield tapped and attacking, and you exile the token at the end of combat. KiZev can represent a ton of damage in the early game, since when she turns sideways, she sends 3 power at your opponent. She's also difficult to block early because the First Strike Menace combo is hard to combat. If you only have a couple of 1 toughness creatures, for example, blocking is just going to wreck you. Unsurprisingly, KiZev has been played in red aggro decks in both Standard and Pioneer. In Standard as part of Ramanop Red Aggro, a red aggro deck so good that its eponymous Desert had to be banned, and it continued to see play in the post-banning version of the deck, which was by then just called Red Deck Wins. Near the end of her time in Standard, she was also played in Rakdos Aggro. She's also gained some points in Pioneer, where she's played in that format's version of Red Deck Wins. However, she's slowed down a lot in recent years and doesn't have any points so far in 2024. At number 3, it's Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. We had back-to-back Koglas on the list earlier, and now we have back-to-back Ragavans. Sort of. This time, he isn't just a creature token. I bet a lot of people thought Ragavan would already be sitting at number 1 on this list, but for now at least, there are 2 apes that are ahead of this monkey. For 1 red mana, it's a 2/1, and when it hits an opponent, you make a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library, and until end of turn, you can cast that card. He also comes with Dash, which means you can pay the alternate cost of 1 generic and a red to cast him, and he gains haste, and returns to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. In other words, Ragavan is a nicely statted 1-drop that is also an insane value engine, since it gives you mana and cards. It's from Modern Horizons 2, so it's never been legal in Standard or Pioneer, but it has quickly asserted itself in Modern Legacy and Vintage, and in fact it asserted itself so effectively in Legacy that it's banned there, and it continues to be heavily played in both Modern and Vintage. It's arguably the best 1-drop in the game, and for that reason, I do think he'll ultimately become the number 1 card on this list. For now though, there are 2 cards in front of it, including the number 2 card, which is Simian's Spirit Guide. For 2 generic and a red, you get a 2/2 ape, but the real power comes because you can exile it from your hand to add a single red to your mana pool. So this gives you a mana boost of 1 mana at the cost of going down a card. That's not something all decks are interested in, but if you're a combo deck, the guide can allow you to go off a full turn earlier, and it also works nicely in prison decks that look to get their lock pieces into play as early as possible. Because a free mana boost is amazing, the Spirit Guide has seen a ton of play over the years, especially in Modern and Legacy. It actually had to get banned in Modern in 2021 because it was so heavily featured in the format that it was effectively speeding up the format by an entire turn. It still sees play in Legacy, and that's not going to change anytime soon, but it does feel like Ragavan will inevitably pass it. And at number 1, it's Treetop Village. This is a creature land that gains the ape type when you animate it. It doesn't say that on the original Urza's Legacy version, but it does in the Oracle text. It enters tapped, can tap for green mana, and for 1 generic and a green, it becomes a 3/3 trampling ape until end of turn. That's good because having a land that can become a relevant body later in the game is a really powerful thing, especially when you consider the various advantages of creature lands, like their immunity to sorcery speed removal, and their ability to ensure decks continue to have a board state in the aftermath of a board sweeper. This has led to it seeing a whole lot of play in multiple formats. One of the sweetest uses of the cards is in land still decks, which like to play stand still and beat the opponent down with creature lands, like the Village. This allows you to pressure your opponent while not popping stand still, and eventually your opponent has to do something about the fact that these trampling apes are attacking them, giving you the 3 cards from the enchantment. But yeah, Treetop Village has been played in a whole lot of decks that it didn't have special synergy in too, since it's just really nice to have a land that can become a very real creature. It has slowed down quite a bit in recent years though, and I wouldn't be surprised if, a year from now, both Ragavan and Simeon's Spirit Guide are ahead of it. So, those are the top 10 monkeys and apes in Magic. If you want to own any of these cards, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including more that look at specific creature types, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.